Imagine a world where the real rulers aren't the presidents you vote for, or the billionaires plastered across headlines. No. The true power sits in invisible networks, central banks, reserve currencies, and secret treaties, quietly deciding who wins wars, who controls economies, and how much freedom you actually have in your daily life. What you see on the surface is carefully designed theater. Beneath it lies an architecture of control built across centuries, refined in crisis after crisis, always keeping ultimate influence in the hands of a very few. This isn't wild conspiracy. It's documented history. Today, we pull back the curtain and reveal the hidden framework that still shapes our entire planet. Let's step back to the late 19th century, a time when the world still ran on gold. The British Empire stretched across a quarter of the planet. London sat at the center, and the Bank of England, chartered way back in 1694, acted as the quiet conductor of global trade. Currencies were tied to gold. You couldn't just print money whenever you wanted. That hard limit brought stability, but it also meant governments and empires were chained to the amount of gold they could dig out of the ground or seize from others. Across the Atlantic, America was exploding with industrial muscle. Steel kings like Andrew Carnegie, oil barons like John D. Rockefeller, and finance titans like J.P. Morgan were building fortunes that dwarfed entire nations. By 1900, the United States had overtaken Britain as the world's largest economy. But its banking system? Fragmented. Thousands of small, independent banks, each issuing its own notes, competing in a wild, unregulated frontier. And threading through both sides of the ocean were old European banking houses, most famously the Rothschilds. For decades, they had financed governments, wars, and railroads across continents. Their networks moved information and capital faster than any telegraph. When a Rothschild said jump, European chancellors asked how high. This was the classical gold standard era. Trade boomed. Wealth poured in. On the surface, it looked like the pinnacle of human progress, a gilded age of innovation and empire. But beneath the shine, pressure was building. Industrialization created millionaires overnight, and left millions more in grinding poverty. Workers in Manchester factories or Pittsburgh steel mills saw the riches, but barely tasted them. Wealth concentrated faster than ever before. Nations raced to secure gold reserves. Colonies were squeezed harder to pay for it. And private bankers, men who were not elected by anyone, held the power to expand or contract credit at will. When they pulled back, economies seized up. When they flooded the system, bubbles formed. Then came the warning shot. 1907. A failed attempt to corner the copper market triggered panic on Wall Street. Banks refused to lend. Depositors rushed to withdraw savings that simply weren't there. Lines stretched around blocks. The entire system teetered on collapse. One man stepped in, J.P. Morgan. He locked the heads of America's biggest banks in his private library until they agreed to pool their reserves and bail out the failing institutions. It worked. The crisis passed. But the message was unmistakable. A decentralized, privately controlled banking system could bring a modern economy to its knees in days. And only a handful of unelected financiers had the power to save it, or let it burn. America's leaders took note. Europe's central bankers took note. And quietly, behind closed doors, conversations began about a better way, a more organized way, to manage money, credit, and ultimately power on a global scale. What they didn't realize yet was that the next crisis wouldn't be a single panic in one country. It would be a world war that would shatter the old order completely, and open the door to something far more centralized. The old world died in a Sarajevo street in June 1914. One bullet, and the tangled web of alliances pulled the great powers into war. Almost immediately, the golden rules that had governed money for decades began to break. Nations needed vast sums, fast. Gold reserves couldn't keep pace with the cost of modern warfare. So Britain, France, Germany, one after another, quietly suspended the gold standard. Paper money poured from printing presses, untethered, promising to be redeemed later. The consequences arrived slowly at first, then all at once. In Germany, Defeated and saddled with impossible reparations, the presses never stopped. By 1923, a wheelbarrow of marks couldn't buy a loaf of bread. People pushed billions in cash to the baker, only to watch prices double by afternoon. Retirement savings, family inheritances, reduced to kindling. You could paper your walls with money and still go hungry. That quiet, creeping dread, the realization that everything you'd worked for could vanish because someone far away decided to print more, is the same unease that lingers in every financial crisis since. But while nations bled gold and trust, a small circle of financiers on the other side of the Atlantic saw something else: opportunity. The panic of 1907 had already exposed America's fragile banking system. Now, watching Europe tear itself apart with unrestricted money creation, elite bankers and politicians concluded the world needed something new, not chaotic independence, but coordinated control. In November 1910, 6 men boarded a private railroad car in Hoboken, New Jersey, under assumed names. Their destination, Jekyll Island, Georgia. There, in complete secrecy, Senator Nelson Aldrich, representatives from J.P. Morgan's empire, and Paul Warburg, whose family banking network spanned Hamburg to New York, spent 9 days drafting the blueprint for a central bank. 3 years later, in the closing days of 1913, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act. President Wilson signed it on December 23, when most lawmakers had gone home for Christmas. The Fed was sold as a safeguard against panics. In truth, it placed the power to create and contract America's money in the hands of a unique institution, part public, part privately owned by the banks themselves. Paul Warburg became its intellectual father. His brother Max advised the Kaiser's government during the war. These family ties across the Atlantic weren't accidents. They were threads in a growing realization among the financial elite: in an industrial age, money could no longer be left to national chance. It required quiet, cross-border coordination. The Fed's easy credit fueled the roaring 20s. Stocks climbed on borrowed money. Ordinary people, clerks, doctors, even shoeshine boys, poured savings into the market, convinced the boom would never end. It felt like a new golden age. But beneath the jazz and champagne, the same forces that had suspended gold in wartime were now inflating the biggest bubble the world had yet seen. All it would take was one sharp pin, and the hidden architecture being built in plain sight would face its first real test. October 1929. The reckoning arrived. Years of borrowed speculation finally collapsed. Black Thursday turned into weeks of freefall. Trillions in wealth evaporated. But the true catastrophe wasn't numbers on a board. It was what happened when those numbers reached ordinary lives. Banks that had fueled the bubble now couldn't cover withdrawals. Thousands closed their doors forever. Families who had scraped together savings for a home, an education, a secure retirement, watched it vanish. Unemployment didn't just rise, it exploded, from 3% to over 25% in the United States alone. Factories stood silent. Men who had worked decades with pride now lined up for handouts, hats in hand. In rural America, overfarming and drought turned the Great Plains into the Dust Bowl. Black blizzards swallowed farms whole. Hundreds of thousands packed jalopies and headed west, chasing rumors of work that rarely existed. Governments, desperate, made it worse. Tariffs shot up, America's Smoot-Hawley Act choking what little global trade remained. Countries turned inward, hoarding gold, contracting credit when economies were already suffocating. This wasn't bad luck. It was the direct result of a system that allowed unchecked leverage, speculative frenzy, and private control over public money. A system that rewarded the few while punishing the many when it inevitably failed. In Germany, the same contagion fed something darker. Unemployment topped 30%. The humiliation of Versailles combined with economic ruin created a vacuum, and into it stepped voices promising order, strength, revenge. The world was learning, painfully, that financial chaos doesn't stay confined to balance sheets. It reshapes societies. It births monsters. Yet even in the depths, change was stirring. Franklin Roosevelt took office in 1933 and moved fast. He declared a bank holiday, then forced citizens to surrender private gold for paper dollars. He devalued the currency against gold, pumping liquidity into a dying economy. It bought time. But national solutions couldn't fix a global fracture. Then came the second cataclysm, World War II. As the planet burned once more, Allied leaders refused to repeat the punitive disaster of 1919. They needed a system that would prevent depressions, stabilize currencies, and bind the free world together. In July 1944, while fighting still raged, 730 delegates from 44 nations met at the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. For 3 intense weeks, they rebuilt the rules of money from the ground up. The US dollar, backed by America's vast gold reserves, was crowned the world's reserve currency, fixed at $35 an ounce. Other currencies pegged to it. 2 institutions emerged: the IMF to handle short-term crises, the World Bank to fund reconstruction. Power that had been scattered across old empires now concentrated in Washington and New York. The greatest crisis in modern history had exposed the fatal flaws of the old architecture. From its ruins rose something new, more centralized, more coordinated, and designed to endure. But as we'll see, no design is ever truly permanent. Bretton Woods didn't just stabilize the world. It crowned a new king. With the dollar as the global reserve, America could export its currency to fund reconstruction while the rest of the world accumulated dollars for trade. The Marshall Plan delivered $13 billion, hundreds of billions today, rebuilding Western Europe's ports, roads, and factories. American companies followed the money, exporting goods, expertise, and influence. Europe recovered, yes, but on Washington's terms. Old empires like Britain and France quietly relinquished colonies as new nations emerged into a financial order already dominated by the dollar. The beneficiaries were unmistakable: Wall Street banks, U.S. multinationals, and the American middle class enjoying unprecedented prosperity and cheap imports. The costs fell elsewhere, on decolonizing countries borrowing dollars for roads and dams, only to face crushing debt when commodity prices crashed or U.S. interest rates spiked. Geopolitical power followed the money. What was once diffused across European capitals now converged in Washington and New York, backed by the IMF and World Bank as enforcers of the new rules. For almost 30 years, the system held, anchored by America's gold stockpiles and the solemn promise of convertibility at $35 an ounce. Then the bills came due. Vietnam, social programs, persistent deficits, dollars flooded abroad. Foreign holders, led by France, started redeeming them for gold. Fort Knox emptied. On August 15, 1971, Richard Nixon went on television and closed the gold window. No more conversions. The dollar became pure fiat, backed solely by faith in the U.S. government and its economy. That shift unlocked something profound. Without gold's discipline, central banks gained near limitless flexibility to expand money supplies. Inflation roared in the 1970s. But so did the capacity to manage crises through printing and bailouts. And with that flexibility came acceleration. Wealth began concentrating faster than at any time since the Gilded Age. By the 1980s, the top 1%'s share of U.S. wealth surged toward levels not seen since 1929. Fiat money, once sold as a tool for stability, had become the quiet engine of modern inequality. The architecture evolved yet again, more interconnected, more leveraged, more centralized than ever. Crises could be papered over with coordinated interventions. But the power to create money from nothing rested even more firmly with unelected institutions and the superpowers they served. The dollar's dominance looked eternal, reinforced by American military reach and the petrodollar deals that followed. Yet every throne built on trust carries the seeds of its own challenge. When faith wavers, when debts mount too high, when alternatives emerge, the most carefully engineered systems reveal their fragility. And today, as new powers rise and old debts strain the foundations, we're watching those seeds begin to sprout. The architecture we've traced, from gold vaults to fiat empires, hasn't faded into history. It's very much alive, quietly orchestrating the world we live in today. At its core sits the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, the central banker's bank, where policies are aligned away from headlines. It remains the unseen coordinator, helping navigate crises through shared protocols and quiet consensus. The petrodollar mechanism endures as well, oil trade overwhelmingly settled in dollars, recycling vast sums into U.S. assets and sustaining reserve demand. While non-dollar settlements have grown, they remain a minority, underscoring the system's lingering inertia. Yet gradual cracks are appearing. As of late 2025, the dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has dipped toward 57%, still dominant, but trending downward amid steady diversification into euros, yuan, and other currencies. Global debt levels paint a starker picture, total debt hovering just above 235% of world GDP, with public debt alone surpassing $102 trillion. These echoes of past speculative eras, overleveraged systems, and widening imbalances remind us how quickly stability can strain under accumulated weight. Geopolitical shifts add pressure. Expanded BRICS nations continue measured steps toward alternatives. Expanded local currency trade, gold accumulation by central banks, and exploratory payment platforms bypassing traditional networks. Progress is incremental, building resilience rather than abrupt rupture, yet it signals a slow rebalancing of influence. Digital innovation accelerates the conversation. Over 130 countries now explore central bank digital currencies. China's ECNY leads with trillions in pilot transactions. India's digital rupee expands rapidly with new features. These systems promise efficiency and inclusion, but also raise questions about control, privacy, and how money flows in a surveillance-capable age. The key insight most overlook? This isn't driven by hidden cabals or sudden revolutions. It's the natural evolution of power in an interconnected world, crises prompting centralization, inertia preserving it, and new realities gradually testing its limits. Over-centralization has always carried risks: fragility in the face of shocks, inequality from uneven benefits, vulnerability when trust erodes. Right now, with persistent inflation pressures, mounting debts, and shifting alliances, this hidden framework faces its sternest examination in decades. History doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. And the rhymes we're hearing today carry the weight of empires past. At its core, this hidden architecture of global power is not some eternal fortress. It's a human invention, shaped in moments of crisis, strengthened by inertia, and always vulnerable when trust begins to fracture. History's clearest lesson is that no system, no matter how dominant, endures unchanged forever. The real power lies in understanding it, seeing the patterns before they fully emerge. So ask yourself, in this shifting world we share today, who truly steers the course? And armed with this perspective, what will you do with the knowledge? If this revealed something deeper, subscribe. The patterns of history never lie, and I'll guide you through them.